Your emergency fund is fundamentally broken.
Following all the traditional advice and having 3 or even 6 months of expenses saved in 2026 makes no difference at all.
This isn't an emergency fund. It is a false sense of security that will evaporate the moment something real goes wrong.
The rules have changed, but nobody updated the handbook. This means millions of people think they are financially prepared while actually standing just one crisis away from a total catastrophe. I am Viet, and I watch how people are caught unprepared by crises that overwhelm the emergency funds assumed to be sufficient. If you think your emergency fund protects you, or if you want to understand why old advice on emergency funds has become dangerously obsolete, follow the channel and don't forget to hit the like button if this information is useful to you. Here is what everyone still continues to believe: save 3 to 6 times your monthly expenses in a high-yield savings account, and you will be safe. This advice made perfect sense in 2010.
It has no meaning in 2026. Crisis costs have exploded.
The frequency of crises has increased, and the types of crises people face are completely different from the types of crises the traditional advice was designed for.
But everyone is still following outdated guidance and calling it financial responsibility.
Let me show you exactly why your emergency fund is insufficient by showing you how real crises hit real people in 2026.
Meet Jennifer.
She is 29 years old, earns $72,000 a year, and did everything right according to traditional financial advice. Her monthly expenses are about $4,000, so she saved $18,000 as a 6-month emergency fund. She felt great about this. She was more prepared than the vast majority of her friends.
She thought she was financially secure. Then she was laid off. A contraction in the tech sector. Nothing personal. They just eliminated her entire department.
At first, she wasn't very worried because she had an $18,000 buffer.
6 months seemed long enough to find a job. Here is what actually happened.
In the first month, she filed for unemployment insurance and started looking for work.
Unemployment insurance paid about $450 a week, or about $1,800 a month.
Since her expenses were still $4,000, she withdrew $2,200 from her emergency fund.
Balance, $15,800.
Second month, she is still looking.
The market is brutal.
Everyone in her field was laid off at the same time, and they are all competing for the same positions.
She had to fly to another city for a promising job interview.
It cost $800 she couldn't avoid if she wanted that job.
She didn't get the job.
She withdrew another $2,200 for expenses.
Balance, $12,800.
Third month, her car broke down. A major repair cost $2,800. She could have managed with a cheaper fix, but she needs a reliable car when she finds a job. Between the car repair and her normal expenses, she withdrew $5,000 from her emergency fund that month.
Balance, $7,800. Fourth month, a job offer finally comes in.
The salary is $68,000, slightly lower than before, but she needs the income.
There is a problem. It's in another city. Moving expenses are brutal. Deposit, first month's rent, moving truck, travel expenses, all the setup costs for the new apartment. That's another $6,000. Her emergency fund dropped to $1,800, and she hasn't even started her new job yet. She is forced to put some of the moving expenses on a credit card. She thought 6 months of expenses would be enough.
In reality, her emergency fund lasted exactly 4 months.
And this is assuming nothing else went wrong. No medical emergency, no dental work, no unexpected family obligation.
Just job loss, 1 car repair, and the costs of getting back to work. And now she starts her new job with credit card debt and a depleted emergency fund. She is more financially vulnerable than she was before the crisis.
This is the reality of crises in 2026. They are more expensive than before.
They happen more frequently and stack on top of each other in ways that traditional 3 to 6 month advice never accounts for. That advice was created for a world where crises were isolated events.
A car breaking down, or losing your job, or a medical bill. One thing at a time. But life doesn't work like that anymore. Let's talk about why crisis costs have exploded.
Car repairs that used to cost $800 now cost $2,000. Because modern cars are essentially computers on wheels.
You can no longer just replace a part. You need special diagnostic equipment and proprietary software. Medical emergencies are even worse.
Even if you are insured, an unexpected hospital visit can easily cost $3,000 to $5,000 with deductibles and out-of-pocket maximums.
Dental emergencies. A root canal costs $2,000 per tooth. If you own a home repairs. A new HVAC system is $8,000 to $12,000. Roof replacement is $15,000 to $30,000. Traditional emergency fund advice assumed crises would cost maybe $1,000 to $2,000. Manageable amounts that wouldn't ruin your 6-month buffer.
But in 2026, a single crisis can wipe out 20 to 30% of your emergency fund even if you have saved the recommended amount. Have 2 crises in the same 6-month period, which is not unusual at all, and you will be nearly bankrupt even though you did everything right. Traditional advice has another problem. It calculates your emergency fund based on your current monthly expenses. But crisis costs don't care about your budget. When you lose your job, expenses don't magically drop to match your reduced income.
In fact, they mostly increase. You drive more for job interviews.
You spend more on professional development or certifications to make yourself more marketable.
You might need to move cities for a new opportunity.
Because you are stressed, you eat worse, which leads to health issues, which leads to medical expenses. Jennifer's $4,000 monthly budget was based on her normal life with an income and a routine. As soon as the crisis started, when you account for job searching costs, car repairs, moving expenses, and the small increases that appear when life becomes chaotic, her actual spending approached $5,000 per month. Her 6-month emergency fund, calculated based on $4,000 a month, should have theoretically provided a $24,000 runway. But the actual crisis spending ran out in 4 months with $5,000 a month plus major one-time costs. Now let's talk about the biggest change in crises that the old advice never foresaw.
Recovering from job loss takes much longer than before.
Traditional advice assumed you could find another job in your field within 3 to 6 months.
That might have been realistic 20 years ago. Now it's a fantasy.
In 2026, the average job search time for professional positions is 4 to 8 months. If you are in a specialized field or were laid off during a sector contraction where everyone lost their jobs at the same time, it is even longer. This means the old 3 to 6 month emergency fund advice was designed for a world that no longer exists. If the average job search time is 6 months, saving 6 months of expenses means the money runs out just when the probability of finding a job is highest, but before you start earning again. You find a job in the 6th month, but your first paycheck comes in the 7th month. Your emergency fund is gone. You borrow money to cover that last month. This is exactly what happened to Jennifer. But it gets worse. Let's talk about what I call emergency fund erosion, which no one talks about but affects everyone. Your emergency fund is supposed to sit safely in a high-yield savings account, earning interest, until it is needed. In theory, it is protected. In reality, it is slowly being destroyed by inflation while just sitting there doing its job. In 2026, inflation is still running higher than interest rates in savings accounts. Your high-yield savings account might be earning 4%. Inflation for things people buy regularly is around 5 to 6%. Your emergency fund loses 1 to 2% of its purchasing power every year just by existing. The $18,000 emergency fund Jennifer saved had perhaps $16,500 in purchasing power when she needed it 2 years later, measured by actual crisis costs. This is why your emergency fund never feels like enough. Even if you reach the target amount, you saved 6 months of expenses based on the cost of things when you started saving. When you need it, everything is more expensive. A car repair that was $1,800 2 years ago is now $2,800. Moving expenses that would have been $4,000 are now $6,000. Your emergency fund amount remained the same, but crises became more expensive.
So, what is the truly correct size for an emergency fund in 2026? Not 3 months. Not 6 months.
For most people, it needs to be closer to 12 months of expenses.
Here is why. 12 months provides a real shield against the reality of modern crises. It accounts for the longer job search time.
It provides a buffer against the fact that crises are more expensive and often come in clusters. It offers a cushion against the purchasing power erosion that happens while the money sits there.
But depending on your situation, even 12 months might not be enough. If you work in a volatile sector, you need more. If you are self-employed and your income fluctuates, you need more. If you have dependents relying on your income, you need more. If you have chronic health issues that can flare up, you need more. If you own a home instead of renting, you definitely need more because home crises are catastrophically expensive. Let me show you what a sufficient emergency fund looks like for someone earning the same $72,000 Jennifer earned. After taxes, they take home about $54,000, or about $4,500 a month. Their expenses are $4,000. Traditional advice says save $18,000 to $24,000. I say at least $48,000 is needed, which is a full year of expenses at their current spending level, and ideally closer to $60,000 to account for increased crisis costs and inflation erosion. I can hear you screaming at the screen right now. $60,000 in an emergency fund. That's insane.
That's too much money sitting there earning almost nothing, which could be invested in grown.
You are absolutely right that it feels like too much. You are absolutely wrong that it is too much. Let me show you why. Sarah learned this lesson the hard way.
She is 34 years old, earns $85,000 a year, and her monthly expenses are about $5,000. She saved a traditional 6-month emergency fund, $30,000. Then she got pregnant, had a complicated pregnancy, and was on bed rest in the 7th month. She couldn't work for the last 2 months of the pregnancy and took 3 months of partially paid maternity leave after the baby was born.
This means 5 months of zero or reduced income.
During this time, despite being insured, her medical expenses were $8,000. The baby required unexpected equipment and supplies, another $3,000. They had to hire help for housework she couldn't do while on bed rest, $2,000. Her husband took unpaid leave to help with the baby, which was $4,000 in lost income. And her normal expenses continued.
$5,000 a month for 5 months is $25,000. Let's add it up.
$8,000 medical, $3,000 baby supplies, $2,000 home help, $4,000 husband's lost income, $25,000 normal expenses, total $42,000. Her $30,000 emergency fund ran out in less than 4 months, and despite having an emergency fund that everyone said was sufficient, she had accumulated $12,000 in credit card debt.
This is why traditional advice is dangerous. It's not exactly wrong, just incomplete. It assumes crises are simple and isolated.
Real crises are complex and chain reactions. One thing goes wrong, causing something else to go wrong, which causes something else to go wrong. And modern crises are more expensive than they have ever been in the last 20 years.
Here is another factor no one talks about.
The emergency fund has to cover not just your expenses, but also the cost of solving the actual crisis. When Jennifer lost her job, she needed money to get by.
Yes.
But she also needed money to find a new job, interview clothes, interview travel, potentially moving. When Sarah had pregnancy complications, she needed money to get by, yes, but she also needed money for medical care, baby supplies, and help with housework. The emergency fund has to do 2 jobs at once: cover your income and pay for solving the crisis. Traditional 3 to 6 month calculations only consider the first job, covering income. It completely ignores the second job, which usually costs at least the same or more. Let's talk about what happens if you are freelance or have variable income, because traditional advice is even more insufficient for you. If you are a freelancer, contractor, or small business owner, you don't get unemployment benefits when business dries up.
You don't have a regular paycheck.
1 month your income might be great, the next month terrible. For you, an emergency fund is not just for catastrophic events. It is a fundamental infrastructure to manage normal income fluctuations. If you are self-employed and following the traditional 3 to 6 month advice, you are playing financial Russian roulette. You need to save at least 12 months of expenses, possibly 18 to 24 months.
Why? Because crises are not just personal, they are also business crises. Your biggest client doesn't renew their contract. The market changes and demand for your services drops. You get sick and can't work for a while. Equipment breaks and needs replacing.
These are crises that employees don't face, but are completely normal and expected parts of freelancing.
Marcus learned this the hard way.
A freelance graphic designer earning about $90,000 a year.
He saved $36,000 as a 6-month emergency fund.
He felt really good because it was above the traditional recommendation. Then his 2 biggest clients, who made up 60% of his income, both terminated their contracts within 1 month of each other. Not because he did bad work, but just because their budgets were cut, and freelancers are the first to go. His income dropped from $7,500 a month to $3,000. His expenses were $5,500.
Finding new clients required time, effort, and money for marketing and networking.
It took 5 months to replace that lost income, and he burned through $27,000 of his emergency fund. He thought he was being responsible by saving 6 months. In reality, he barely survived a completely predictable and normal freelancing crisis.
Now let's face the biggest objection to a large emergency fund: opportunity cost.
Every dollar sitting in your emergency fund earning 4% could potentially be invested in the stock market earning 8 or 10%. Over time, this difference compounds significantly. If you keep $60,000 in a savings account instead of investing it in the market, you are potentially missing out on thousands of dollars in returns every year. This is a real concern, and that is why you need to think strategically about emergency fund size relative to your total net worth.
If your net worth is $60,000 and it's all in an emergency fund, yes, that is probably too cautious. You need some money directed toward investment for growth. But if your net worth is $300,000 and while $60,000 is in an emergency fund, $240,000 is invested, that is actually a very reasonable allocation. Real wealth builders understand something the poor don't.
You need both security and growth.
Your emergency fund provides security.
Your investments provide growth. You need both, not one or the other. The mistake most people make is either keeping too much in the emergency fund and too little in investments, or too little in the emergency cushion and too much in investments.
Both extremes are problematic. Here is my framework for thinking about emergency fund size in 2026. Start with a baseline of 12 months of current expenses.
This is your minimum target. If you work in a volatile sector or have variable income, add 3 months.
If you own a home instead of renting, add 3 months.
If you have dependents, add 3 months.
If you have any chronic health issues, add 3 months.
If you are self-employed, add 3 months. If you are the sole earner for the household, add 6 months. Using this framework, someone who is self-employed, a homeowner, and has 2 children should target about 24 months of expenses in their emergency fund.
This is not being cautious.
It is realistic, based on the real risks they face in 2026 and the real costs of crises.
Yes, it's a lot of money. Yes, it takes time to save. Yes, you could have been investing it instead. But do you know what is more expensive than missing out on investment returns? Going into debt because you didn't have enough emergency savings when a real crisis hit.
Jennifer eventually rebuilt her life. She paid off the credit card debt from the moving expenses. She rebuilt her emergency fund, but this time she ignored the traditional advice. Now she is 32, earns $80,000 a year, and has $55,000 in her emergency fund. Her friends think she is too cautious. She knows she is being realistic because she personally experienced what happens when an emergency fund is too small.
Here is the final piece that makes this urgent in 2026. We are living in an increasingly unstable economic environment.
Job security is at its lowest in decades. Sectors are being rapidly disrupted.
Climate change is increasing the frequency of natural disasters. Health costs continue to rise faster than wages. The political environment creates economic uncertainty.
All these factors increase both the likelihood and the cost of crises. Emergency fund advice from 10 or 20 years ago was created for a more stable world.
We no longer live in that world.
The risks are higher, the costs are higher, and the recovery time is longer. Your emergency fund needs to reflect this new reality, not the reality of the era when your parents built their careers.
Here is what you need to do.
Stop following the traditional 3 to 6 month advice. Calculate for yourself what 12 months of expenses really means.
Add extra months based on risk factors. Start reaching this figure aggressively. Yes, it will take time. Yes, you will forego some investment growth in the short term. But you will also have built real financial security instead of just an illusion of security. Your emergency fund is not small because you are bad at saving. It is small because you followed advice that is dangerously obsolete for the world we actually live in. Most people won't update their goals because 12 months feels extreme and no one wants to keep that much money in cash. These people will learn the hard way, like Jennifer, Sarah, and Marcus. But you don't have to learn the hard way. You can choose to build real security now before you need it. Because by the time you realize your emergency fund is too small, it will already be too late.